back to another episode of the Daily Budget.
What's up, guys?
Hey, we are your illustrious hosts, Alex and Marco.
Illustrious.
I
like that.
Yes.
It's a new beginning over here.
Yes. And what are we here to talk about today?
Well, illustrious means fancy and expensive. So I think we're going to be talking about inflation.
All right. Inflation. So we're going to be covering the essentials.
Yep.
What it is, what does it mean, and why should you care?
Why should you care?
Exactly. Because a lot of people, they don't know. And, inflation's one of these words that you'll read in news articles and you'll hear about, inflation is, 1%, inflation is 3%.
And the crazy thing is, by the time somebody's lifetime goes by, they'd be hit with so much inflation, they don't realize the impact of it. So,
yeah.
Thank God we are talking about it today, right?
Yeah. So, let's get into it. So, inflation.
Yeah. So,
what is it?
What is it?
So, at its very essence, inflation is the rate at which the average price, like the price levels of everything in an economy increases over a certain period of time. It's typically quoted as yearly. So you'll often read, inflation is 2% per year. The Bank of Canada targets 2% inflation per year.
Yeah.
And so it's the average price, over everything, right? Obviously the bank can't account for every single good or service in the economy, so they choose what's called a basket, which is essentially lumping in the most common items and then tracking their prices over time. Okay,
so what does it mean? Like if, let's say, inflation is 3% by the end of this year?
So what it essentially means is that 1 unit of your currency will be worth less in 1 year's time than it's worth now.
Now, by less, it means like my money's getting cut off in half, or
no, your loonie, your toonie, your $20 bill will still look the same, but it won't be able to buy as much.
So now the price of everyday items will be a little bit more.
Exactly, and that is the hidden cost of inflation, the inflation tax.
Yeah.
And so one way that this is really important for people is when we talk about saving and investing.
Yeah.
And now us and every other financial advisor, personal finance channel, podcast, whatever, will always say invest. Don't just have your money sitting in an account.
Put it in the IRA at 35%. Yeah. Risk your life.
But this is why.
This is why.
So not only by investing you have a greater chance to make higher returns, but in doing so, you can offset and overcome the effects of inflation. Yeah. Because if you just have it sitting in a savings account, and let's face it, the savings rates are pitiful these days. You're lucky if you get, 0.1%? If that?
0.01%.
Yeah, actually. So interest rates on savings accounts, deposit accounts are essentially zero.
Yeah.
So if we take an example, and let's say that you have $100,000. If it's sitting in a savings account, earning 0% interest, that money's not growing.
Yeah.
But every year, that money is effectively worth less because of inflation.
Yeah.
So now, if inflation is 2% per year, after 1 year, what you could buy with $100,000 now in real money costs $102,000.
Yeah.
And then another year goes by, and then you have 2% of $102,000, and so it compounds. And so in 10 years, your $100,000 will be worth about 18% less in terms of buying power.
Now, if my money just keeps going down, by protecting it, I technically protecting it.
Protecting it.
By investing it, I'm protecting it. Hey.
You are. No, you absolutely are. And so, if you can average, let's say, a 7 or 8% return on your investments per year, inflation is 2%, that's a 5% difference.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to count it in, as well as the thing that you purchase. You might not realize it, but groceries are getting more expensive. And we actually posted a picture on our Instagram page in regards to something that is very important, like housing prices. If you guys haven't noticed, just go to our Instagram page _billionaire, And you will see the picture of a house, like a very beautiful home. I think it looked like 3 bedroom, almost like a double lane garage, like huge size. And how much was the price? $16,000.
Yeah, 16,000. It's unthinkable to us
Yeah,
today, right?
today, right? Yeah, but the good thing about it is inflation when you're buying assets is good.
Yes.
Because it means the
Yes.
price of your assets, such as your home or something worthwhile like your stocks and investment, your TFSA, can grow. And then thus protecting you from that negative impact.
Yeah. It's a double-edged sword, though.
Right.
Right? Because taking housing, right? It's the prime example. Housing and college tuition, I think, are the biggest examples of where the rate of inflation has grown wildly and thus resulted in prices that are out of reach for a lot of people and make even more people have to really stretch in order to get them. And that's the other reason why you should understand and care about inflation.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the price of everything that inflates. In a perfect world, wages should rise to keep pace with the level of inflation and the rising prices.
Yeah.
In theory, someone who earns $70,000 a year and the price level is, I don't know, $100 a year, in theory, both the wage and the price should go up by the same amount.
Yeah.
But what we see a lot of times are these inequalities where wages will go up by a lot less, or in some cases even stagnate, whereas inflation will, if a certain price or service it will increase, at a much larger rate, and that's where you get these gaps, these disparities.
Yeah. So another way to actually save yourself from the inflation is to constantly or aggressively look for either a higher paying job or try to provide more value at your job right now, so then you can earn that extra income.
Yeah, earning more, investing to earn the returns, those are your surefire ways to beat inflation. Because is inflation going away?
Nope.
No, it's not going.
Now, finally, I wanted to ask, in Canada, it's the Bank of Canada that sets the inflation rate, right?
It's a target.
It's a target.
Yeah.
So now, how do they know which rate to target?
So the CPI, that Consumer Price Index I mentioned earlier, they use that and they track the average price of that over time and to gauge where they should target inflation.
Okay, so now you said the CPI. So what are some things that how do they measure the CPI?
Yeah. So the CPI is, again, like the average shopping experience of a Canadian.
Okay.
And, for any non-Canadian listeners, this applies to any country as well.
Yeah.
But it'll have things like, food, shelter, transportation, discretionary spending like apparel, medical care, sports, travel. So essentially, the everyday things that you spend your money on, it's grouped into that so-called basket of goods, and that average price of that basket is tracked over time.
Yeah.
And so the Bank of Canada maintains a target bandwidth of about from 1% to 3% for inflation.
Nice.
Ideally, keeping the inflation rate around 2%. And it's the central bank's job to control and implement the monetary policy of the country, and try to keep inflation under control, because as we've seen several times throughout history, inflation can run rampant in what's called hyperinflation. Look at post-World War I Germany and Zimbabwe, currently Venezuela, which happens when a government prints money.
Yeah.
And some of you may recognize that as the quantitative easing that the U.S. Federal Reserve implemented back in the 2008 crisis.
Yeah.
And what they've been doing now during COVID-19, printing billions upon billions of dollars to inject that into the economy. It leads to rapid growth in inflation because the size of the economy isn't changing. You can imagine the economy as a large room. And let's say in that large room it has, you could hold 300 people, you have 50 people. The people are like the dollars. You start injecting more and more people into that room, like the size of the room doesn't change.
Nope.
But you need more people.
There's
right?
much more volume in there, yeah.
Absolutely. And then each person will have less and less, let's say, to continue with the analogy, personal space.
So now
and personal space, in this case, is the value or the buying power of a dollar. The more you have, the less each individual person has.
So now you got.
So the more of them you need to do anything.
Right. So now you're printing. So these are called economic stimulus. Either you're printing money or you're making new tax laws and whatnot in order to keep inflation reasonably steady, but as well have an economic growth.
Yeah. And now, can inflation ever be negative? Is a question you see sometimes.
Yes.
Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is positive inflation a good thing or a bad thing?
Now, we're not going to jump on the boat as to say whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because let's first say if I have a house for 30 years, I definitely want to make sure that the value of it goes up. Mm-hmm. But I also don't want to keep adding costs to my groceries every week, right?
Exactly. And so it's, there's a balance. And I guess, the answer is really it depends.
It really does.
I'd say low inflation to the tune of, let's say between 1% and 3% is typically regarded as good and healthy for the economy.
Yeah, it's usually the target for most like banks or world banks.
Yeah, and so that's generally viewed as healthy for an economy. But the opposite, deflation, is actually it's something that's harmful to the economy.
Yeah.
Right? Because a deflation, as one would expect, is a continuous decline in the level of prices.
Yeah.
And it can have a negative effect on the economy because it's usually, I guess a sign that something's wrong. And, neither you or I are economists, and I don't pretend to know, in depth the causes or the mechanisms that could cause this. But deflation will lead to, it could lead to lower production, lower wages. Exactly, lower production, lower wages, people getting paid less means that they go and they spend less, which means that businesses have less revenue, which could cause them to shut down, which leads to job loss, and it's this downward spiral.
Oh my God, depression all over again.
And so while on the surface, deflation may sound enticing, prices go down. That's good,
more.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could buy a house, maybe, when I'm 50.
Yeah, but the economic downturn of that, and let's remember, the elderlies are relying on us in order to supply for their retirement.
Yeah.
So if deflation occurs, we're going to have to work much, much harder, but be able to provide less.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, everything is connected.
Yeah.
And an increase in price or a decrease in price, it can't be taken at face value, because there's always some domino chain. There's always some knock-on effects. You may not hear them, see them, or feel them immediately.
Yeah.
But they are there, and as discussed with the little hidden inflation tax, you can spend many, many years unaware, and then one day realize, I have a lot less money than I thought.
Yep.
Or rather, I have the same amount of money, but I can't buy nearly as much as I used to.
Exactly. And actually, I think this time, actually, right now, in our current time, is where we're going to see a shift in inflation. During the COVID, where supplies and demand couldn't really match with each other, now we're going to come into a stage where that might switch, where we might actually have much more demand than supplies in certain areas and essences, right? It's going to be really cool to see how my bananas, my apples, and my new laptop next year is going to cost me much, much more or much less. We'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
And now we're not asking each of you to go out and become an
economist
in your own little way. No.
Grocery economist.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not asking for a spreadsheet tracking the cost of bananas over time.
No.
But we wanted to bring this to your attention to make sure that you were aware of inflation, and B, of what it means.
Yeah.
Right, and C, why you should care, how it affects you, and how, and most importantly, how you can beat it, and how you don't have to worry about inflation.
That's right. Awesome.
Yeah, and with that, did you have anything else, Marco? I think I'm good.
Yeah, I think we've covered everything.
We've given the people what they want. We've given the people what they need.
Oh,
Yes.
I feel accomplished.
Now go out there and price those bananas. Yes, but as always, thank you all so much for listening. Your support is extremely appreciated, as you know, especially in these early days of the channel as we try and grow. Please make sure to give us a follow, like, subscribe
like
on
us,
Instagram, YouTube, all of our social media platforms.
If you like us, help us push the message. Wow, I couldn't talk for a second.
But yes, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it most importantly with anyone who you think can benefit from what we have to say. Because at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is spark a conversation.
That's right. We're trying to inflate 2 billionaire.
Exactly. That's one rate of inflation that we want to go way up.
Way up.
Way up.
Guys.
Thank you. Peace.